In this section, I intend to elucidate some important issues with occasional repeats, analysis, and a little more detail not previously mentioned. Briefly drifting into my thoughts, I pondered on the unusual developments in my life since returning from Perth, the time I spent in St. Kilda, and my disastrous time in Chelsea Heights. Remembering the last moments of my stay at Edita's, the whole wretched scene came alive when I loaded the last of my belongings into the van, and the moment she arrived home. She was bewildered seeing me move out, asking what's going on. That was my final farewell, while thinking it was good to know you. As previously mentioned, my final words were, "You don't deserve a person who is the lowest of the lowest kind of a man." Did she realize that I was repeating her words? Had she already conveniently forgotten? I looked directly into her eyes as I uttered them, and she stood motionless for a moment, probably shocked about how serious I was. I felt sad that humans could be so cruel to one another without any feeling. As I walked to the van, I was unsure if she said anything audible, but I felt the words in my mind as if she was speaking to me. "But nobody called you like that?" Knowing what I knew, without any opposition or judgment, she was very capable of denying what she said, having made a character reference about me in front of her sunshine. I have never been a person who supported falsehood, contrary to the ideals of Jehovah's Witnesses and my daughter's lies spoken against me in favor of their mentally conditioned mother's belief. As in a German proverb, lies have indeed very short legs and cannot run fast. I was certain that Edita would soon forget why I left. I had no desire or any reason to tolerate being classified as the lowest of the lowest kind of a man. It was indeed a very ugly assault on my person, especially after being unexpectedly hindered with all my undertakings in every possible way. However, I will repeat myself, after discovering what I was dealing with, it was far better to live on the streets than live under those circumstances for another day. I still wish her well, and hope that nobody else has been or will be hurt any more. Alas, my dwelling on the streets was unnecessarily prolonged after leaving Chelsea Heights, and I was forced to measure the street corners a little longer, extremely exhausted and sleepless. I could not tell anything about my unfortunate state to anyone. It was a torment unbearable. The prospect of moving into some form of housing did not look promising. I had inspected a number of dwellings, and most of them were unsuitable for human habitation. One of them topped them all. It was truly derelict and broken to pieces. As mentioned, even the outside was visible through large gaps in the floorboards and corners of almost every room. Some real estate agents must have regarded me as a special case, considering those inhabitable dwellings suitable for the needy. I am not including their names for ethical reasons. They may have seen me as they imagined, not a human being. Perhaps a single poor man of ethnic background, or simply somebody naive enough to accept housing, which was falling apart. But in the meantime, some rental benefit could be squeezed out of them. Was I meant to become like those homeless people sitting on street corners and begging for money? Was walking the streets at night on empty for a long time not enough? On the other hand, while I conducted those meditation sessions, I was determined never to say anything to anyone, only hoping I might receive donations for my efforts as a token of appreciation. I was extremely stressed out and embarrassed about the situation, while pretending that everything was in order. My money being frozen for a short period of time did not help. It seems that someone had been trying to access my account unlawfully. My inability to apply for social benefits due to not being housed also did not help, but I kept my head up, just like my mother used to advise us. Even if your collar is dirty, keep your head always up. I learned the true meaning behind her words, especially then. Edita was still visiting Malek discreetly, and who knows what lies she was feeding her with. Who knows what Margaret was also telling her. They all imagined and had their own opinions about me, without knowing anything regarding my personal circumstances. Probably they were following the advice of kick the fallen man, which was a commonly used phraseology amongst locals. When anybody asked me where I lived, I resorted to politely decline answering, for my current address could be anywhere on the streets. In reality, I was living in an enormously large, and at the same time, tiny bubble. Nobody knew who I was, where, and when I was. Only once was I asked after the gathering by someone if I needed transport home, and you can guess what my response was. I preferred the long hours of walking until the next morning, occasionally being stopped by the police asking me their usual questions. It became a routine for the homeless. During this time, my health was also impacted, as I had to put up with a hernia situation, needing to wear a special corset to help me with my discomfort. This was to last for a while yet, that is until I was housed in a small attachment to the family home of a very friendly couple in Springvale. However, having received my belongings from the storage company, I discovered I had so many things which had to be squeezed into that small dwelling. Alas, not much room was left for me, but at least I was able to dedicate part of the lounge room to create oil paintings. I was happy about finally being housed, but could do far better in a large place. I still could not invite anybody to my humble residence, for fear of being criticized, pitied, or advised that I should be housed somewhere better. From then on, I became more isolated than before. I could only express my real self to others the way they discovered me in the outside world. But my hidden lifestyle, which was forced upon me, remained unknown to them. This included all members of my family who had divorced me under the careful supervision of the witnesses. I could close my eyes to all those circumstances, for there were more important issues. For instance, I had to have my hernias surgically corrected. On the other hand, the Social Security's Department, as it was known then, was pressurizing me to undertake a government-assisted business study towards establishing my own financial security, which I gladly accepted, as I thought it was a good opportunity. I was extremely happy to have my only companion, Blinky, back with me. She was certainly a long-lasting senior, and very slow in movement due to her advanced years. And I hoped she would last a little longer than normally expected. I was thinking how this little pet could be the greatest friend one could tell one's stories to, for although she could not understand our unique human speech, when I had tears rolling down my cheeks, she rubbed herself around my legs, sat next to me, and purred. It was almost like telling me there is nothing to worry about in life. For the outsider, it would appear as just insignificant. In fact, many people I had encountered would consider any closeness to a pet as abnormal, and many in the past most certainly thought of me as requiring psychological help when there was definitely no need for it. This was also one of the reasons why I chose to remain extremely private, along with some people's wrongful judgments, amplified by the multitude of lies spoken against me by my closest. In reality, I was wrong, thinking of them as my closest, for by their behavior they proved to be far from it. In regard to my black Burmese, I can confidently declare that she had also been targeted and treated as an unwanted thing, just like me being considered as odd, different, and unwanted. My ex-wife had a very distinct disliking against this cat, probably because it was mine. My daughters, when very young and in their teens, treated the poor animal harshly, which might have been after encouragement from their mother, being bitter against my alleged dishonesty and other unspeakable characteristics, especially after our separation and her disguised hatred. Because the cat was black, it could be charmed, as in black magic. This belief was confirmed by a number of witnesses. In short, due to the completely ungrounded fears of superstitious people, anything that was black or gray could be judged in this unusual light. Even when living in Chelsea Heights, the poor cat was not really welcome, and sadly I was surrounded by such people for a long time. As I briefly mentioned before, Wendy was keenly interested in starting a close relationship with me, but I was desperately in need of grounding myself while rediscovering me in the real world. There were too many issues needing to be considered about my individual self and place in the world. She loved being close to me, and this seemed to make Muriel feel hopeful that her husband would be freer from the avid attention. She felt that my involvement with Wendy could save her marriage. Nothing to this effect has actually been voiced. However, as observed, the behavior of all parties declared more than words could explain. I was determined not to question the situation, but was not feeling comfortable when my hands were grabbed by Wendy every time I visited Muriel's for their weekly gatherings. Alas, how I felt was ignored, and I was uneasy about the ungrounded hopes and empty dreams. It was a fantasy about an unfulfillable future engagement in a permanent relationship. I was becoming more shattered and devastated within my silence, drowning in hopelessness, nobody noticing anything. There were occasions when I was asked to spend a little time sitting on the seats in the backyard only to have my hands held, and many questions directed about our dreamt-of future with Wendy. If I had no other issues to deal with and had not been burnt by a woman I once loved, maybe I might have felt differently. Although I never wanted to hurt anybody, what choice did I have? I could not continue with a dream relationship and did not know how to get around it without hurt. After I made my intention clear, I discovered Wendy commencing another, and probably more meaningful, relationship with a French gentleman. When I met the pair, Wendy expressed a form of fear towards me, behaving as if I would be very jealous and start an unwanted situation. But when she discovered that it was not the case, she and her new boyfriend were relaxed. On discovering me wishing them all the happiness, they were both very surprised, but I still wondered why others who were my supposed friends, had to dictate my terms of living. Maybe they were considering my ethnicity and accented speech, judging me as if I needed their directions to live a life according to their liking. I noticed a cold attitude from Muriel towards me from then on. It felt as if I had caused a great disappointment in her mind, and one could guess why. Wendy told me she had been married with her current partner for about 18 years at the time, but they hardly had any proper relationship, and had a young daughter she called her little tartlet. Her house was also like a mini farm. I gave the young girl a tiny black and white portable television, which had once been given to me by my eccentric friend Andreas as a gift to pass on to somebody else, and she was ecstatic. Wendy continued to meet at Muriel's for their regular get-togethers with her close friend Crossingham, conducting ritualistic and traditional American Indian practices of smudging, drumming, and speaking as inspired by the keepers of the truth from a higher dimension. They were keen on producing and selling dream catchers. Crossingham had a Native American artifacts and bookshop, and was desirous to publish a book. They asked me to illustrate her book, and I created a series of illustrations. But after discovering that I was not developing any relationship with Wendy, they decided not to go ahead with the project, thus leaving me with those illustrations and graphics. They used to talk enthusiastically about Native American sweat lodges and their unique experiences. They spoke of an American Indian who desired to copulate with blonde Australian girls to spread native seeds everywhere around the world, as apparently prophesied. I was not at all disturbed about the whole issue, for I developed a habit of blessing those who hurt me. As I said before, I had other things to worry about. About this time, Margaret had done her part in destroying my reputation completely with the meditation group I was conducting on a voluntary basis. Editha added her poison of naming me as her sexual partner within the same when visiting them discreetly. Wendy, on the other hand, claimed that her then close friend Archie, her wonderful lover, as she put it, had taken a picture of her with an accidental optical illusion, which they all believed to be nature spirits and fairies circling her body. This image was taken in her backyard. Knowing that everyone is capable of influencing matter with their minds, using thought energy, as with Japan's Dr. Emado's experiments with water molecules, where he proved the validity of thoughts influencing material things. I decided to duplicate the same, conducting my own experiments by influencing photographic film within people's cameras purely by thought. I discovered with repeatable experiments that thoughts could create different images on photographs. Deliberately desired imagery could also be incorporated in single-shot images. As discovered, some were cheating by double-exposing their photographs, claiming they have captured spirit images or UFOs, but several laboratory tests revealed the reality. My humble equipment was not suitable for creating double exposures, as the frames would not align properly, and the result was disastrous. However, pictures taken in single exposures with one click after their negatives had been subjected to thought energy fields yielded different outcomes. What Archie has photographed with that optical addition around Wendy could only have been generated by the jewelry she was wearing or by water droplets on the camera lens. Following exhaustive testing, it was proved that what was claimed was not so, but nothing to the contrary could be told to the people involved. On another occasion, when visiting Muriel and Archie, I discovered an unused roll of film which they and Wendy claimed to have fallen out of my pocket, but it was certainly not mine, and I left it with them. Some time later, Wendy told me what happened when Archie attempted to load his camera with it. As soon as we offered him his tea, while he was loading it into his camera, the roll of film fell into his cup. I still think the film was yours, and was probably exposed. He was not meant to take photos with it, because I think you have planted it there, because it would be cheating. I wondered what reason I had to cheat, or help somebody else appear as if cheating. She asked me again, "You tell me," while putting her hot, sweaty hands on both of my cheeks. From then on, I was not going to put up with it any longer. This was an ultimate assault on my person. Long before that event, Archie had taken double exposures with his camera while visiting the St. Kilda Festival with his grandson, and almost all his exposures contained my faded images as additional elements. I did not provide those negatives to him, and certainly did not pre-expose them to my images. I believe some extreme thought energy might have been utilized, or he might have taken my images using the same negative film accidentally in his camera. But the tests, as they claimed, revealed that those images were produced with single-click shots on his own negative films. However, neither Wendy nor any of the others involved with that experience took it seriously, and absolutely nothing was spoken about it. They only spoke about what a miracle Archie's photograph of Wendy was. With regard to my images appearing in his pictures, one questions whether someone wanted to create the illusion unbeknownst to me. I was struggling with my finances at the time, and the ability to buy films for others would be impossible. I felt that because they did not achieve their objective, and I did not become Wendy's lover, they had to create excuses to punish me. Upon this, I made it clear that I did not want to have anything further to do with any of them, and ceased attending their meetings. It was going to be their loss, not mine. They could not come up with any satisfactory explanation about the additional images appearing in their photographs. A few other people had also been capturing unusual imagery incorporated into their pictures. One of them was Edita, but she was incapable of manipulating them, as she did not possess a sophisticated camera. Hers was an average quality to capture snapshots only. It was truly astounding to see additional images appear in her photographs, similar to what I have been able to do with my 35mm Pentax. I had captured images of Lucky, who died due to old age, while I was still staying in Chelsea Heights. But those images appeared after the cat was gone. They usually appeared on occasions, such as birthday celebrations we were invited to at Edita's friends, and occasionally at home in Chelsea Heights. However, after I was no longer there, she was privately showing to people what she had so far collated. This way she created quite an interest in those so-called ghost images. One day, when she was showing me those printed images of Lucky, I told her light-heartedly, without much thinking, that perhaps the cat had a message from the other side, and was probably thinking of her, wanting to return back. I believe she took that seriously. However, what later happened when I was living in Springvale was something I had no absolute proof or explanation for. I will tell you about it soon. It was about this time I discovered a very neglected and starving cat in the shopping center. I decided to take the poor animal home, and washed its completely muddied fur and started feeding her. It must have often remained outside and kept sneezing, but I was not able to take her to the veterinary clinic. And people I was talking to said that probably the animal was so very sick that it was dying anyway. Indeed, one morning I found her in front of my door, lying motionless on its side, eyes half emptied, and it had been bleeding from its nose. When I inquired about what could have happened to the poor animal, I was told that it was probably a form of cancer they could not be able to help. I felt so saddened that I still feel the pain of it even today. I always wished that animals would be looked after by intelligent and caring humans, but a typically biased citizen told me, "We do not like cats here, for they are bad for our native animals." My meditation and discussion group at Melek's had finally come to an end after the undesirable participation of friends like Margaret, Editha, and Wendy, as well as Melek with her ungrounded worries. I was seen as an immoral element within their allegedly wholesome and divine get-togethers, since I did not follow the great guru's teachings, and was therefore no longer welcome. After Wendy's input, yet another roll of film was found, where I had my last meditation group, and I was also accused of having dropped it there purposely, but I did not. However, I was to take at least one roll of film to the photo lab, but it was missing, and I was unsure where I had lost it. The roll of film found there was by Fuji, whereas the one I was looking for was Kodak. Is it not interesting how people want to own someone and then judge them according to groundless gossip? Was there something to learn from this involvement, for I had similar experiences before? Why did I attract such judgmental people? It really was beyond me. Was I regarded as being naive, or was there something else I was yet to discover? After those select friends' input, I was judged as being false, or like someone who played games with them. Perhaps, just perhaps, my ex-wife was the real witch, and did not realize yet, was capable of cursing me while keeping me under her wicked spells, under the guise of righteousness. I was aware of her constant prayers to her God, asking favors in regard to me and the children. Was she, in reality, worshipping what she most feared, the one masquerading as Jehovah? On the other hand, I never sought fame, glory, or recognition from any of my friends or associates. I never wanted to collect worshippers, considering their interests above my own when conducting those group activities. I always prefer to help people help themselves, find their own value in the real world, hoping they will be able to free themselves from forms of intolerance and dogma. I always want people to think, be inventive, and creative. However, a few great friends, as they consider themselves, could not accept being other than above everybody else, all knowledgeable, always correct, even though they were far removed from what they truly wanted to be recognized as. Obviously, I needed to be painted as fake, thanks to such wonderful friends. Was it not Magda who initially desired to see me like that? I was indeed in the world, but not of the world. Repeating myself, Wendy had asked me to help her with portrait expressions, for she wanted to do psychic drawings at mind, body, and spirit festivals. From time to time, I attended those festivals, hoping to draw portraits of people for a small fee, while a number of them demanded that I should draw the images of imagined persons around them. Interestingly, they recognized my drawings as their deceased relatives. Some even wanted to show me their old photographs to prove how authentic my portraits were. If my works have helped them to cope with their loss, at least in a psychological consideration, I can only be happy. Unfortunately, I have also discovered a number of other artists who were there only to make money, while feeding people with their multiple guesses, their own fears, and indeed many lies. Many so-called psychics were doing cold reading, making others believe how genuine they were. In reality, they were only out there to make money. There were also psychic artists, without being so, and yet capable of generating a substantial income. Although I could paint imagined or inspired images of people's relatives who were no longer living, yet claimed to exist elsewhere, I still had my reservations, for there were so many unknowns. Then again, if my works provided people with some consolation, I could only feel happy. When I was valued and paid for my work, I was content. However, some of the psychic artists were unhappy about my input, maybe due to their ungrounded, personalized jealousies, without admitting it. They obviously did not feel comfortable with perceived competition. Only a few appeared to be genuine, but the others were making comparisons between their mediocre works and my portraits, like those few so-called psychics who preferred to think down on me, for they realized how sincere and genuine I was. This is by no means a complaint, for in reality I was discreetly psychoanalyzing people without letting them know about my professional background. But those psychics' guesses or alleged readings had to be the only genuine ones. By belittling others, they wanted to put themselves on high pedestals. This way, they could make the money they wanted, but people are not complete dummies. They can separate the false from the real. Many so-called psychics prefer to consider Anglo-Saxon originating people as being more spiritual, and others not genuine. How sad it was, especially as I have never considered myself a psychic. But I have been gossiped about regarding my supposed inability to do any psychic readings. My detractors never attempted to talk to me face to face, or have any substantial conversation with me. Therefore, how did they know about my capabilities? Maybe they should first learn to become more spiritual, as they preach elsewhere, as their great teacher and exemplar, Jesus Christ, or their other chosen gurus are. One young couple, after receiving a portrait of their spirit guardian, told me about my drawing, proudly proclaiming that they had never known true peace until they met me. They said that when there was any disharmony, the image of the person I had created for them would almost jump out of the frame and talk to them. This person, streaming from that drawing, often told them how they should live, without strife. Later, they asked me to draw the portrait of the wife's guardian. They believed there was going to be yet another teacher who was able to come out of the other frame and talk to them. Personally, I thought that this would not be a bad thing, for it was creating harmony, although I had no doubts about how real the situation was. According to the couple, I had given them a gift without equal, and apparently opened a gate for them into the unknown. But my ex-wife and associates would claim it to be no other than demonic possession. Did she by any chance experience it to know so much about it? Or was it what her teachers of high fanaticism told her? In a different time, I was challenged to draw the color image I was seeing or imagining around someone else. How did they know that I could sense the color emanations streaming from people's physical bodies? Probably they hoped and expected it. Yet I avoided talking about these things, although I could see those colors, but I believed everybody was able to. Kirlian photography is based upon the same idea and is used to capture the images of the electromagnetic field around people and objects. A middle-aged lady visited me, asking if I could illustrate her aura in color. I made sure that she understood me when I illustrated such images, that they might be based on guesswork or my imagination. I noticed a small gap, some break within the light emanations surrounding her body, and spoke to her about it while I drew the colorful image of her aura. I told her about the size of the dark spot and the shape I was observing. She was spellbound, as she softly uttered, "I have never told anything about my health to anybody, for I always felt embarrassed about it." Then she told me that a short while ago she had a pacemaker inserted there. Was it a good guess on my part? Was it something totally different I was yet to discover? I was in shock, for I was really surprised about this unusual occurrence. The mind is certainly an exciting and intriguing subject to explore, as there are so many unknowns. The human brain is extremely capable of transmitting more information about ourselves than realized. It is also capable of receiving information from exterior sources, which has been proven many times in scientific and controlled situations all around the world. It has nothing to do with the beliefs of superstitious people who would consider what they could not describe as evil or speaking to the spirits. This attitude is nothing short of hindering progressive thought and discovery. This next episode of my life is full of fantasy dreams and adventurous undertakings. Why, you might ask, pondering if what you are about to discover really happened. Everything you are about to read is factual from what is imagined and what truly occurred. You might even think you have heard it all before, however you may only have taken note of a fraction of it. During those occasions when I was drawing portraits which people have recognized as their deceased relatives or guardian angels, I met a number of interesting people. Some of them claimed to be reincarnations of their former selves from eons ago. I came across a number of Napoleons, Merlins, Christs, apostles, pharaohs, philosophers of old, and more. There were also those who got my telephone number and were leaving messages on my answering system without announcing their names or giving me their numbers so that I could return their call. My world was suddenly filled with people who made me think that I was probably living on an alien planet. In the meantime, I also visited Sydney, and yes, I met Margaret in a shopping arcade and went around town, filming my experiences. One day she suggested I should visit certain people who were involved in something highly spiritual and out of this world. One evening we made our way to that gathering. It was very familiar to me, and the people recognized me almost immediately as one of the contributors to courses in miracles compiled by a number of psychologists. I spoke, and they all listened, concluding that I must have had a lot to do with those courses, for it was all based on logical thinking, while defining what true spiritually really meant. Margaret was astounded, asking me how come I was so familiar to them and that they knew me. She could not get over it. I decided to keep quiet about it and said very little, for although there was no need to recognize my direct involvement with those logical thinkers, the same philosophies bubbling to the surface were enough for them to recognize who I was. They named me Learned Master Teacher. Remember, Margaret preferred to belittle me in front of her genuine friends in Melbourne and kept questioning why and how those people could have known me, the foreigner, who could not have been as sophisticated like she and her friends were, yet having the same eyes as Sai Baba. Later I treated her to dinner at one of the restaurants nearby. She was surprised. Did I perhaps do something wrong? After staying overnight in one of the spare rooms at her Cremorne home, she asked me to suggest a healthy breakfast, and I recommended one of my mixtures, avocado, tahini, and honey dip. She loved the idea, and when I offered her money for accommodating me, she started to cry, saying she had not seen $100 notes for a very long time since her retirement. No matter how people behave towards me, I always prefer to remain friendly with them. Some friends called my behavior stupidity, but I could live with it, for I was a forever foreigner anyway. She always wanted to see what I was filming, complaining that I did not show her anything. Although unwilling at first, I attempted to show her the rocks and storm at sea I had captured a short while ago in Sydney, but she kept complaining that I hardly had any time for a good conversation with her in the spiritual sense, constantly filming and taking photographs. It was really so ironic to hear something like that, for right in the beginning, my ex-wife also used to complain about my interests. It seemed I was meant to be there just to entertain others, without being interested in anything else, particularly photography. That used to sadden me a lot, causing unnecessary stress. I prefer not to have anything to do with people pretending to be my friends, yet not accepting me with my interests. In fact, my visiting Sydney was not to see Margaret, but rather to have some time for myself. Yet I met her for a cup of coffee and ended up with unwanted emotions. Consequently, I was happy to return to Melbourne. There were a few interesting events taking place all around me, although some would consider them insignificant. Before I completely broke off after being accused of cheating by Wendy, Muriel, and their associates decided to hold an open day for people interested in so-called psychic activity. It was particularly organized to assist a friend of theirs by again providing voluntary readings, channeling, and possibly psychic art for a fee. Volunteering participants were simply expected to give a little of their time for this endeavor. In those days I was conducting art classes for all ages at the old cheese factory in Berwick. A young gentleman who was also a friend of mine and in charge of artistic activities at the said premises had volunteered to do similar drawings to mine just for the experiment. While I was teaching art there, we had a group of talented youngsters as well as mature-age students. It never fails to amaze me how certain memories creep up from time to time. We started with the most basic and ended with very sophisticated aspects of painting and drawing. One young girl showed great interest in art, and after explaining to her parents why it was so important to encourage her to further her studies, she kept regularly painting promising pieces of artwork with my assistance. And, as I discovered years later, she won a scholarship and continued with her wonderful career. There was a petite young lady from Yorkshire, England, who truly loved the classes. One day I conducted a little psychoanalysis of the concerns she spoke of, and told her what she might expect with her own private life. Much later she told me how astounded she was about my prediction. I was apparently right. It was not a psychic reading. Instead, it was a psychological assessment. Wilbur, the son of Willis and Joan Connor, who I was befriended with after meeting at Muriel's, was another talent, worth remembering. I began visiting them regularly over cups of coffee and talking about New Age spirituality, while also considering their concerns in regard to Wilbur's gender preference. It was his choice, and they could only love and accept him as he was. He was happily employed in wardrobe duties at the Victorian Arts Centre. After meeting me at Muriel's, Rosemarie Conroy joined my art classes. She fondly remembers how I encouraged the students to visualize, draw, and paint what they were seeing within their minds. One day I asked them to close their eyes and describe what came to mind first, and then attempt to draw what they were seeing. Many have seen something, from butterflies to flowers. Some claimed that they could see blank and just darkness, whereas Rosemarie claimed to see just a blob, and found it amusing to draw what she saw, a blob. When I was asked to volunteer to draw psychic art at the home of Muriel's and Wendy's friend, Rosemarie noticed how miserable I looked with my flu condition after a period of homelessness I experienced before my housing in Springvale. She made mention of it to me, but I avoided talking about my situation as I did not want anybody to know my predicament. Shortly after I was housed, I had my hernias repaired at Dandenong Private Hospital by Dr. Reed, and was often visited by Joan and her close friend and neighbor Nettie, who was also known as Jan. It was so strange that during my operation, and when they decided to visit me, I could see those two friends either chatting excitedly with each other or even driving on the way to the hospital, and when they arrived, they were astounded to hear what I remembered, telling them what they spoke about and what time they were to arrive. They were certainly very surprised, and I could not explain how it happened. I cannot imagine myself as just dreaming, or the whole incident simply being coincidental. This was one of many other occasions I have been a part of. I could often be anywhere, observe any events, or listen to the conversations of people without physically being there. Often I ignored such states of consciousness and would normally never attempt to speak about it to anybody, instead analyzing those circumstances critically within a psychological consideration. I had been inflicted with an inner fear of hurting someone, like my ex-wife Magda, for a very long time. When and if I attempted to speak of my experiences, she would immediately consider all things unexplainable as being evil, instigated by the devil. It was hard to break away from this habitual fear, but to my surprise, it was easy talking about my experience to Joan and Nettie. During my first major hernia operation, something was accidentally spilt in my eyes, and it badly affected both of them, for they were bloodshot and burning. I tried to open them, but could not. Yet I could see my environment easily, even when a nurse came to check my blood pressure. She was saying, "No, this cannot be." She was reading it as 60/120, and I told her what she was reading to her, and my visitor's amazement. Shortly after, I told her, without even looking, what they were seeing. "Observe, is it better now, since it is 120/60 instead?" According to Joan and Nettie, the poor girl was in shock, asking me over and over, "But how did you know? How can you do that?" I still don't know how it happened. And nearly a week later, when I was discharged and free to go home, Joan insisted that since I had nobody to look after me, other than my old cat Blink, she was going to ask her husband if I could stay at their place for a few days. That sounded nice, but I was very concerned about my one and only wonderful companion, my Blinky. When they took me to their place in Browns Road, Noble Park, they suggested I could stay in their family bedroom, and she was going to take food every morning and evening to my cat in Springvale. I trusted them. Now I was calmed. Shortly after, Nettie decided to come into the room, visiting me, sitting on the side of the bed and shaking it like a trampoline, hysterically laughing, but at the same time hurting me really badly. She took my agonized screams as a joke, jumping on the bed. Whenever Joan came home, after supposedly feeding Blinky while putting food in front of the door at the back of the house, I felt uneasy. A few days before my permanent return, against their insistence that I should stay a little longer, I elected to go home primarily to check on Blinky. The poor darling was sitting under my electric organ and crying very loudly, thus declaring she was abandoned and starving. It was truly heart-wrenching to see the poor animal suffer like that, but neither Nettie nor Joan could see the situation as it was. Later she told me she was awfully frightened of cats since her childhood. Once holding a piece of meat between her lips for the cat to jump and take the food from her mouth. Another time she was showing her tongue to the same cat, which it took to be food, and attempted to bite her tongue. That is why, she said, she put the food down cautiously and left quickly. Alas, Blinky remained old, defenseless, and other cats from the neighborhood ate all the food put there, and she starved to death. She was about 25. When I finally returned home, my place was chaotic. I could not do much while recovering, and Blinky had disappeared for a number of days. Next door to where I lived, they had demolished an old school building, purchased by a Muslim group to build a religiously inclined new primary school. One evening I discovered Blinky's mummified and dried body, perfectly recognizable by examination of one of her broken toes and tooth. I cried bitterly about this tragic ending of a wonderful life and my only companion for a very long time. When I made mention of it to Joan, she adamantly denied it, saying she was inspired by one of our invisible friends, that Blinky was alive somewhere else, and probably looked after. Obviously, she could not admit to the fact. In her fear of cats, in truth, she starved the animal. Considering her kindness and very naive nature, I could only forgive her because nothing would bring the poor cat back. I suggested that to overcome her fear of cats, she should get herself a kitten and look after it, although she already had 2 small dogs at home. She did, and they got a beautiful cream-colored cat called Bailey. In my personal life, I was going through enormous turmoil. In addition to it all, I was surrounded with people eager to find a meaning in their lives by becoming involved with me in a romantic sense. One such attended my art classes with her daughter. She was not at all happy with her rich husband, who had everything and could provide the needed wealth at will, but apparently he did not have what I had, a beautiful mind and loving nature. Her daughter was allegedly saying she wished her father was a very gentle and kind man like Suren, the art teacher, while she, the mother, was apparently in love with me. She hoped that I would provide her with a reason to separate from her partner. She also believed that I was most certainly as wealthy as her husband. On several occasions she asked me if what she thought was true in regard to me being in love with her, as I treated her and her daughter kindly, but I was gentle with everyone, regardless of their race, gender, or age. She asked me if I was likely to buy a nice house in the vicinity, to which I answered her that one day I might be interested in doing so, but that one day was to be much later. However, she immediately contacted real estate agents to get in touch with me for a possible chance to fulfill her dreams. I had to explain to those agents that I was not ready to purchase a house yet, but in time I would be in touch with them. In those days, the managers of day-to-day operations of the old cheese factory decided to do some major alterations. They were still going to be responsible for the stables and whole hire facilities for functions like wedding ceremonies, but only wanted to have just one artist in residence. At the time, there was a young lady starting to teach art who would love to see me go, although many people eager to learn art were attracted to me. She begged me, saying, "Look, you are an established artist, whereas I am struggling to do so. One of us has to go, and I do not want to be the one." Eventually, much to my students' sadness and disappointment, I sacrificed my classes. The other girl was ecstatic. I hope she has established herself. The hopeful lady, with her daughter wanting me in exchange for her rich husband, came visiting me at my Springvale dwelling, where everything was chaotic, leaving no room to move. I was embarrassed due to not having enough room, and not yet having been able to put my life in order. As soon as she arrived, without her daughter, in the kitchen, she leaned towards me, placing her well-waxed red lips upon mine, twirling her tongue around my beard. Rosemarie arrived about the same time as previously arranged, asking how she could help. Lola did not appreciate the interruption, reluctantly saying that perhaps we should meet another time. I was glad to have invited Rosemarie to visit me. A further unwanted scenario was thus avoided. I do not enjoy unwelcome and certainly unexpected advances some people are eager to make. Following this occasion, when we had our final class at the old cheese factory, this most hopeful and eager lady asked me yet again if there was any chance of getting involved together and marriage. I discreetly explained that I needed to re-establish my own life first, and could not consider what she proposed. She became extremely angry with my response, and as we left the campus one last time, her young daughter standing next to us, Lola shouted at me using ungainly expletives for all to hear. I felt highly embarrassed, ill at ease, and rushed into Wilbur's car, whereupon he laughed jokingly, asking what it was all about. We had some good times at the old cheese factory, several exhibitions, and a school expo where we involved the students and teachers in how best to express themselves in art based upon my theories, which they all benefited from. But now we were leaving the premises for one last time. I have not returned there for a very long time, even to this day. Some of my barrack memories are truly amusing. There was a time when I was asked to conduct regular meditation sessions at one of the houses where other guests were gathered. They were all keenly interested in my creative visualization meditations, which again I was conducting on a voluntary basis. There were discussions after the session was over, during which they served cups of tea and biscuits. I remember the corpulent Siamese cats, which were so extremely friendly with me, even sitting on my lap uninvited, thus creating astonishment about how it could be possible, as they would normally never do this. Alas, much to my sadness, I was told that they disappeared, never to be seen again. One day I was invited to attend a very special occasion of the Last Supper by a kindly lady and her friend, and I went there with Wilbur. I did not know what it was about, but it was yet another eventful time. Neither I nor Wilbur can forget easily. After our arrival, we were ushered into a large hall with a huge long table covered in satin and other high-quality materials. On the table there were classic bowls filled with fresh food, red wine, and bread. It looked almost theatrical, portraying Christ's Last Supper as depicted in religious works of art, like those of Da Vinci. I was asked to sit right in the center, just like Christ was portrayed. Wilbur was to sit at the far right of where I was seated. Other guests took their places around the table, expecting the Master to speak to the gathered once again, remembering the day when Christ spoke to them, blessing them anew. He was to remind them again to consume the unleavened bread and wine, symbolizing his sacrifice for humanity, thus fulfilling his Father's will. It felt as if we were being transported back in time to that occasion described by the apostles in the Bible. It was like a theatrical performance we had unknowingly been led into. Wilbur looked amused, while I could not do anything else other than play the part. I knew that all the guests appreciated the occasion. I had long hair, a well-trimmed beard, and looked like the right person to sit on that throne. But when the husband of one of the ladies entered the room, he glanced in my direction, and seeing Christ and his apostles seated there for the Last Supper, he was in great shock, and decided to go to their bedroom, where he apparently passed out for a while. When I met him much later, he told me all about it, although he declared that it could have been naught else other than a charade. That was certainly a memory which could not easily be forgotten. Having spent some time with the Connors, it was as if I had become part of the family. They all became my only friends, and I was like a family friend who had known them for a very long time, although it had not been that long since we had met. I suppose seeing someone like me, who was truly abandoned, someone not meeting others' imagined creations, thus not to their liking or satisfying their personal passions, the Connors felt the need to get to know me. Maybe they were able to see what many others, including my own family, were incapable of seeing. Maybe they were able to see my hidden side, which others preferred not to notice. However, whatever they were able to discover was to remain with them, for it was not what I needed to know or brag about. I only want to see good in others, wishing no one any harm, unlike my own family, under the influence of false judgments and the warped logic of supposedly self-righteous members of a cult-like religious organization. As far as they were concerned, I could not be anything else other than evil, wanting to hurt people, especially after being disfellowshipped, and a liar for having disclosed my opposition. According to their truth, and as per their expectations of people like me, being apparently capable of only doing wrong, my ex-wife has been so influenced to hate. She was completely unforgiving of opposers to their alleged truth, and against me, the soft target. They certainly found the right ground to seed their God-approved love, which is no other than hatred. Those bent with their own passions, wanting to see me as someone I could not pretend to be, attempting to manipulate my life stream according to their desires without success, thus turning against me, proved to themselves not to be my friends in any shape or form. However sad, I still ask why such an experience was necessary. I have forgiven all the wrongs done to me. I do not even desire to recall them, for they did not know how hurtful they became. When we discover that there are also genuinely caring people with friendliest attributes, the whole world is filled with the most delightful sunshine once more. This is when one knows that life is worth living. I suppose we are surrounded by all kinds of people, some needing to encounter us to learn about life's important realities while discovering themselves in a world of wonders. We need to encounter them to learn and discover all about humankind we are sharing our lives with.